You'll notice that I've provided you with 2 items of required reading about Child Find. That's the guidance document from the Michigan Department of Education and the Family Matters fact sheet. You may read them in either order. I find the fact sheet gives you a great overview, and the guidance document from the Michigan Department of Education is actually very user-friendly and I thought easy to read. The first thing I want to tell you is a little story about myself. I'll throw myself under the bus a little bit because when I used to hear the term child find as part of our regulations and law as a new teacher and even a middle career teacher, I had a very literal interpretation of the district having to go out and find students that needed special ed services. That's not really what it is. There are a couple of parts to the law, and the first part is not something you really have to worry about as a teacher. It's simply notice and public awareness. It might be interesting at this point, if you have another tab open, to go ahead and look at your school's district's website or any school district's website, and you'll notice that they all have to be pretty transparent about having special education services. ISDs also have to be very transparent about having services, evaluation, and resources for parents that are wondering. That's the first part of Child Find Law. The second part is far more applicable to teachers and practitioners and special education providers in schools. That has to do with the evaluation of a student once a disability is suspected. This goes right back to the term we talked about in our past weeks of non-discriminatory evaluation, those assessment procedures. Child Find lays out the regulations behind that, how that happens. This is that regulatory law. These evaluations must be provided at no cost to the family. They need to make sure they've provided written notice to the family that they'd like to test or evaluate a student. They need to get written consent from the family for permission to do that. And it all occurs on a pretty strict timeline that I feel like the Michigan Department of Education guidance document did a good job of laying out. This applies to all students, not just students enrolled in X elementary school in X school district. We're talking about students that go to private schools and non-public schools, students that are unhomed or homeless, students that move in and out of schools. It can get kind of confusing and a lot of red tape, but this is all students. No student falls through the cracks in Child Find. It also talks about how the responsibility to evaluate and to put this process in motion falls squarely on the schools. Depending upon where the student lives and goes to school, which school is kind of determined, but it falls squarely on the public schools. This is a regulation and a law for us. There are some triggers for what it means if a learning disability is suspected, and you're going to find a list of examples on page 8 in that Michigan Department of Education guidance document, but you'll notice at the bottom of that list, it says that list is not exhaustive. To put it plainly, if a school district employee, a parent, a special education professional suspects a learning disability, the school has to investigate that issue. It doesn't always mean that they'll go forth with the evaluation and that triggers a timeline starting, but it means it has to be discussed as a team, it has to be communicated to parents, and it has to be well documented, especially if you decide not to go forward with testing. Child Find is very closely related to MTSS, which we're going to talk about next, because you can't delay any responsibilities under Child Find because you're in the MTSS process with a student. Let me explain that. When MTSS and multi-tiered systems of supports, response to intervention, and more help was available for our struggling learners, there may have been the very good-intentioned or maybe ill-intentioned temptation to slow down and say, no, mom and dad, we're not gonna test for special education because we wanna make sure MTSS doesn't work first. Those conversations can be had and are had all the time, but once a parent says that they suspect a disability, once you've got signed consent or notice sent, you must go through with that evaluation. This can get tricky, especially if there's conflict between the school and the family when it comes to the suspicion of a disability. But you need to dig in, work as a team, document what you've done, probably review the very same resources that I've given you to read this week, and make sure as a teacher, if you're not sure, you run it up the line through administration, through your special education director, some veteran teachers, and find out what needs to be done. Go ahead and review those documents, read those documents if you haven't yet, or review those and kind of file them in the back of your head. This is more of a procedural regulatory thing that school employees must be aware of, but doesn't always fall into your lap as a special education teacher.